Hi everybody, I am live here for a little AP Euro Cram session. The test is in 2 days and I need to figure out how to share this link with you first, so hold on just 1 second. Without having to turn that off to find you all. Also, it's looking, there we go. Let's see if we can get some people in here now. So okay, trying to get my discussion post open so I can see what you guys are posting. And so far I'm the only poster, so let's see here if I can. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. I was here on time and I just couldn't get, I was trying to do this on my computer and it was showing you the rear camera and I couldn't get it flipped around. So fortunately I had a backup iPad and it all worked out. So that's crazy. Oh, hey, I have 4 people here. I'm super excited. Will somebody do me a favor and post? Oh, 5 people. Oh, and a like. Now, see, I'm like super popular, so that's exciting. I am going to. I'm just trying to figure out how to post a link to this in my discussion post in my AP Euro class. So give me 1 second, and then I will start talking about unification. I wonder, can you guys make comments on this? All messages are visible. Let's try that. See, maybe you can make comments on here, and then I can answer any questions that you have that way. You guys are my guinea pigs, you know that, right? I'm trying to figure out how to work YouTube Live and like make it work right for review sessions, because it would make my life a lot easier if I could do AP review sessions on videos like this, and I think it would also be easier for people to get to if they have sports and stuff. So I'm just kind of trying to test it out, and I figured I may as well talk about some unification while I'm at it. So hey, Abby's here. Good. Oh, it just said message retracted though, so I don't know what you said. Maybe it's trying to, or maybe you made a message and then retracted. I don't know. Live chat. Okay, so just keep it clean, because I don't want to be the person who had you guys chatting about inappropriate things. So I'm going to talk about unification now, but I think first I should talk about 1848. My voice is still a little raspy, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Ooh, there's 7 people here now. That's amazing. Okay, so when we're thinking of 1848, we need to think back just a little bit to 1830, the revolutions of 1830, which, just like in France, just in the French Revolution, France sneezes, Europe catches a cold, right? So 1830 revolutions and 1848 revolutions are all going to start with events going down in France and then spreading to the rest of the continent. So in 1830, Charles X had come to the throne. I'm just going to try to prop this up a little bit. And he was he was a member of what were called the ultras. So he was ultra conservative, meaning he wanted to roll back everything from the French Revolution. He wanted to have less suffrage. He wanted to be able to censor the press. He basically is trying to make himself more of an absolute monarch and less of a constitutional monarch. So his son, the Duke of Artois, Artois, is killed. And he blames it on a bunch of liberal conspiracies. And he then uses that as an excuse to pass a series of laws called the July Ordinances. And those July Ordinances basically did all of the things I was just talking about that ultra-conservative would want. So they increased censorship. They restricted suffrage. So there were going to be more restrictions on who was allowed to vote. And basically it's taking power back out of the hands of the middle class and putting it back in the hands of the king. So Parisians are like, nope, 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 that's not going to happen. So once again, they're going to like clear the furniture out of their apartments and barricade the streets, okay? And this is the revolution, roughly, that Les Mis is based on, if you're a big Les Miserables fan. So Charles X is forced to abdicate, and a new king comes to the throne, and that's Louis Philippe. And Louis Philippe is called the Citizen King. He was actually, he was still a Bourbon, but he's from like a different branch of the family tree. So Louis XIV's family all went down this way, right? And that's Louis XVI, and of course he loses his head. Louis Philippe was Louis XIV's brother, who interestingly was both gay and a cross-dresser, but also married and had kids, because that's what you do if you have to, carry on the family line. So his branch of the revolution is, the Bourbon family is called the Orléans branch, like Orleans, like New Orleans. And Louis Philippe is from that branch. So Louis Philippe then raised bourgeois, okay? He had not grown up at Versailles. He had not lived this very privileged, noble lifestyle. And so they thought would be a good choice for king, and he's actually sort of elected. He's supported via popular sovereignty. I want you to think about what that means. So your sovereign, S-O-V-R-E-I-G-N, in that word is reign, right? So the sovereign is the person who reigns. So popular sovereignty means that it's a sovereign who is elected via popular support. It's not totally free elections. There aren't a bunch of candidates or anything, but he has the support of the people, and they think they're getting something new and improved. So in February of 1848, Louis Philippe is going to, first off, in 1847, again, there's a bad harvest. So this is just like France in 1789. So if you're trying to look at some sort of continuity and change over time, I think that's a good example of, or I guess that's more comparison than continuity. French continuity could be, well, the French consistently will have revolutions that cause instability in the rest of Europe, and the French will consistently have revolutions to overthrow rulers. But another thing to compare 1848 to 1789 revolution is that it starts with a poor harvest. In 1847, again, there's a poor harvest. Poor harvest means less grains, and less grains means more inflation, because you're going to have to I'm sorry, I just got a comment come in here. So yes, when women starve, revolutions happen. That's going to lead to inflation because there's a shortage in grain, and so therefore prices go up. There's also an economic bubble, and Caduce, I think you're right that when women starve, there's revolutions, and it's not just as women are starving, it's because, and you guys don't know this because you're not parents, but parents will do like literally anything. There's a saying that kids are your heart walking around outside your body, and it's true. You have to feed your kids, and it's usually the women who have that responsibility. So women again are going to be involved in this revolution. They'll be at the barricades with men. But when they start having these banquets in February of 1848, and the banquets are going to basically be a place for people to get together and say like, hey, here's all of the problems that we're having. How are we going to solve this? I think they're a little bit similar for sort of a point of comparison to the Enlightenment salons where they would get together and talk about Enlightenment ideas. So there's another point of comparison. And that is a place too where Louis is afraid that they're going to get a little too revolutionary. Like, he doesn't want that much critique of his reign. So Louis Philippe will shut down the banquets. And yes, still a Louis, by the way, no number though, just Louis Philippe. So he will shut down the banquets, and people are pissed because they feel like he's not listening, and how is this guy any more bourgeois than anybody else? Louis, over the years, had grown to enjoy the life of the king. He'd gotten kind of fat, and they thought that that was sort of a sign of him overindulging. Possibly he was diabetic, but it's hard to diagnose someone in the past. So basically the revolutions get so bad he's forced to abdicate. And just to remind you, abdicate means that he gives up his throne. So he abdicates the throne, and then they're going to have a period of between February and December of 1848. There's going to be kind of a bunch of different things going on, but I'm going to pause France for a second, because when the revolution in 1848 happens in France in February, it's going to immediately lead to revolution in the German states, in Frankfurt and Berlin, right? So Frankfurt is in sort of the center of the German Confederation, and Berlin is in Prussia. And it's also going to lead to revolution in Vienna, and it's going to, because of the revolution in Vienna, lead to revolutions across the northern Italian states, which are controlled largely by the Austrians. And then also within the Austrian Empire, it's going to lead to revolutions in Prague and in Budapest, so in the Czech area and in the Magyar or Hungarian area of the Austrian Empire. So in France, it's largely about sort of bourgeois complaints, middle class complaints about the king not listening to everything they need. Also a lot of working class, so there's a lot of proletariats involved there too. 1848, just to kind of bring things together a little bit too, is the year that the Communist Manifesto is first published. So when it breaks out in February, it's going to then lead to uprisings in in Vienna. And the March days in Vienna basically are going to be sort of pushing back against the conservative, what they saw as repression against Metternich, who's still in power. And remember, from 1815 to 1848, so from the Congress of Vienna until 1848, is the age of Metternich. And so Metternich, is a conservative. He had passed the Carlsbad Decrees in 1819, which would ban German fraternities because he saw them as sort of a hotbed of liberal ideas, and also are going to increase censorship in the German states because Austria is kind of the dominant power in the German states at this point. And so Metternich is actually going to be forced to flee. He's not going to abdicate because he's not the king. The king of Austria was Kaiser Ferdinand. And Metternich will leave the country, and then they're actually going to end up with a new Kaiser. Ferdinand will, in fact, abdicate, and they will end up with a new Kaiser, and that is Franz Joseph, who, yes, is the same Franz Joseph with the impressive, mutton chops, and he's the guy who will be the Kaiser from 1848 all the way through to 1914, when his heir, not his son, his nephew, is assassinated in Sarajevo, and that will begin the trigger, kind of the short-term causes of World War I. So that's Vienna. Also happening in the Austrian Empire is the Magyars, the Hungarians, are going to start pushing for more autonomy within the empire. And autonomy basically means independence. They wanted some kind of self-rule within the Austrian Empire. And the guy who's going to lead that is Lajos, L-A-J-O-S, or Lajos, I'm not sure how to say it, Kossuth, K-O-S-S-U-T-H, which, just to keep you on your toes, roughly translate in English to Louis. So it's another Louis, but we'll call him Lajos to keep us clear that he's in Hungary. He's basically pushing for Magyar independence. Now, in Prague, there's also revolutions, and in Austria, they really have this nationalist edge to them, right? It's all these nationalist groups looking for a say. So it has also the liberal edge. You know, they're trying to break away from Bismarck's repression. But unlike France, which is sort of purely economic, political, in Austria, it's also relatively nationalist. Okay, that's Austria. Now, Austria's busy messing with all of that, right? They've lost Metternich, who's kind of their mastermind. They've lost their Kaiser. And so as a result of that, that means they're also going to have to pull some troops out of northern Italy, which they have controlled since 1815. Not directly annexed, but they have a lot of power there. They have a lot of troops there, kind of keeping their interests safe, they would say. But probably it's really sort of like trying to expand their sphere of influence. And so they're going to start withdrawing troops from the northern Italian states. And Charles Albert, who is the king of Piedmont, Sardinia, is going to encourage the Italian states to revolt against the Austrians in the spirit of this 1848 revolution, which is going to happen. And then they are going to really, like in Lombardy, for instance, they're going to basically push out the Austrian troops. Austria will eventually come back in and kind of squash all of that. Important thing about Italy, though, is that there are also, they found a Roman Republic. So if we think back to our characters, I guess, our players in Italian unification, the heart of Italian unification, the man who makes people think about what it means to be Italian, the man who founded young Italy, is Mazzini. And Mazzini is going to found in Rome a Roman Republic, and he will create a triumvirate, or a kind of a three-man oligarchy. Well, it's not an oligarchy because it's not a monarchy, but there's three people in the executive branch who are in control of Rome, and that's the Roman Republic. Now, Garibaldi is going to help defend that Roman Republic against the Pope, Pope Pius IX, and he will actually flee Rome at that point. And then the French are going to send troops into Rome to defend the city against the Roman Republic and to defend the Pope, because the French are Catholic, right? So that's in their interest. So they're going to send troops, and by spring of 1849, the Roman Republic will be squashed, and the troops will stay there. The French troops will stay there until they withdraw to fight the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. So that's kind of going to take care of Italy, and most of the northern troops in, or the northern states in Italy that have those revolutions, those will also fail. Now, in Frankfurt and Berlin, it's a bit more complicated. February, back to France, February of 1848 is going to spur a revolution in Berlin. And they're going to really be rallying against what they see oppressive state of Frederick Wilhelm IV. Frederick Wilhelm IV is the Kaiser, or the king of Prussia. And so, excuse me, I've still got this cough. So they're going to try to basically overthrow some of that Prussian control and try to liberalize the state and get more power for the parliament. And that's then going to lead to an uprising in Frankfurt. And in Frankfurt, they're gonna literally overthrow a lot of the German, the rulers of the German states, and then they're going to create a parliament in Frankfurt. And the goal of this parliament in Frankfurt is to unify the German states. They're not sure how they're going to do it, so they have to have some discussions. So the Frankfurt Parliament, their big question here is going to be, shall we unify as Klein Deutschland, as small Germany, or like Calvin Klein, that's how you spell it, or shall we unify as Gross Deutschland, or big Germany, right? So gross is big, gross, disgusting, gross. That's how I think of it. So German liberals are thrilled with this. They're so excited. Now, they're not going for a republic like they had in the Italian states, but they are going for a more liberal conservative or constitutional monarchy. And they also are trying to figure out how they're going to do it, right? If they have Austria in control, then how do we deal with that? Because there's all these Magyars and there's all these other groups. Like, what are they going to do with all of that? And then if they have Prussia in control, is Austria going to be unhappy with that? Because they're both German states and they're kind of vying for control. So eventually they sort of decide they're going to go with Austria because they seem stronger. But they eventually sort of put that aside. I think they get turned down by the Habsburg. They offer it to. And then they will finally offer the throne to Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia. And then he famously says, I will not take this crown from the gutter, right? Because he says, I don't think that you have the authority to offer it to me. And I think there's a question about this on the final that's basically takes this quote from Frederick Wilhelm IV on the IB Euro final and asks you to attribute it to him, the crown from the gutter, because they don't have the authority to offer it to him, he thinks. He is still believes in the divine right of kings. God has put him on this throne. God has put the other German princes on this throne. And only the other princes of Germany have the right to offer him the throne of a unified Germany. So 1848 then is going to be the end of a liberal unification for Germany and of Italy. Unification is not going to happen like that. It's not going to be Parliament. It's not going to be a Roman Republic. As Bismarck will famously say, it's going to happen through blood and iron. Now, to get back to France in 1848, so we left off with Louis Philippe abdicating. They're then going to have a summer of a republic is declared, and a guy named, I'm not even joking, the guy's name is Louis Blanc, B-L-A-N-C, is a socialist, a French socialist, and he's going to create, or at least head, the national workshops. And the national workshops were kind of similar to the WPA in American history, for those of you that are familiar with that idea. Basically, it was, although I would say they're even stronger than the WPA, where he calls it, talks about a right to work, that all people have a right to work. Unemployment in 1848 was very high in France, not only because of the poor harvest causing inflation, but also because of basically an investment bubble. A bunch of these railroad investments have kind of gone belly up, which is going to lead to unemployment. So people need jobs. And Louis is like, okay, we've got a lot of work that needs to be done in Paris. We are going to give them jobs. And for instance, the French sewer had not been created yet. That's going to happen later, but there's a lot of public works programs in Paris that could happen. So those workshops are going to they start in May and they're going to get shut down in June. Unemployment's still bad. People are still having trouble and they still have to feed their families. So when those workshops get shut down, again, there's going to be barricades in the street, and those are called the Bloody June Days of 1848. And this time it's like fighting the street. It gets pretty violent. And eventually a military general named Louis Cavanaugh, C-A-V-A-G-N-A-U-G-H, I think. I have to look at that to know for sure how to spell it. Louis Cavanaugh will say, we need martial law. This is too chaotic. This is too violent. So he's going to instill or put into place curfews, and he's going to threaten people, and that will help keep peace. In December of 1848, they'll have an election, and Louis Cavanaugh, the guy who had put the martial law into place and who had been kind of ruling as a dictator for part of the summer, will run against a guy with a really famous name, and that is, of course, Louis, but Louis Napoleon now. Louis Napoleon is the nephew and step-grandson of Napoleon, because Napoleon's first wife, Josephine, had 2 children, one of whom was a daughter, and her daughter, Napoleon's stepdaughter, had married Napoleon's brother. Their son is Louis Napoleon. Louis Napoleon will run largely on the popularity of his name, largely on promises of restoring French glory, and then he's going to win that election. And in 1851, in December, Louis Napoleon, well, actually, I don't think it was December, it was 1851, but the election in 1848 was December. In 1851, Louis Napoleon declares himself Emperor for life of France, which should remind you of Napoleon coming to power, who would start by staging a coup d'etat, and for a few years will rule as consul, first consul, and then later as emperor for life. So that's kind of France in 1848. So if we think about all these 1848 revolutions, what you really have is a failed liberal revolution. And for those of you in my IB Euro class, this is sort of what Wehler is talking about with the Sonderweg. The failed liberal revolution led Germans to have no experience with democracy and therefore crave an authoritarian ruler. Jeff Ely will say, no, that's ridiculous. It only looks wrong if you compare it to French and British progression. So that's 1848. Now, Bismarck is going to come to power in the German states, but before I get to German unification, I want to go back and talk about Italian unification. So Italian unification, there's a lot of people involved here, but the big ones that we need to remember are Cavour, the head. Remember, don't call him the head in an essay. It's just a nickname to help you remember them. So Cavour is the brains of the operation. Mazzini is the heart and soul, right? He is a romantic, he's a poet. He had founded Young Italy. He made people feel Italian, not to feel Nepalese, not to feel, Tuscan, but to feel Italian, that they all had something in common. And there's Garibaldi, who's like the professional revolutionary. He's the sword and the muscle. And then there's Victor Emmanuel II. He's kind of the face of the revolution because he is the king of Piedmont, Sardinia, which Cavour is the minister for. And then there is Pope Pius IX, and he's kind of the spoiler because Italy is pretty Catholic and Rome is right in the center. And if you're going to unite the northern territories with the kingdom of the two Sicilies, which is Naples and Sicily, the island, you got to figure out the Pope in the middle, right? So he had the possibility to spoil the whole thing. And Pope Pius IX seemed at first fairly liberal and revolutionary, but in 1848, he'll prove himself finally to kind of not agree with republics and revolutions. So Cavour will basically try to organize. Well, first he's got to get Piedmont, Sardinia on the international stage. So he is going to send Piedmont, Sardinia to fight in the Crimean War. The Crimean War had to do with the Ottoman Empire collapsing and Russia trying to kind of take some of that land in the Black Sea, and the Crimean Peninsula kind of sticks down in the Black Sea. And Cavour mostly wanted to get first on France's good side because he had plans for them. And also he wanted to get Piedmont at the peace meetings, because if they could be seen as a great power, as someone worthy of being at these peace talks, that would bring them kind of international prestige. So they'll go and fight in the Crimean War. They get their prestige. Now, previous to this, pre-1848, unification was pretty much liberal and idealistic. We had Young Italy, we had Mazzini, we had the Carbonari insurrections, with, if you remember, in the 1820s, 1821, were the Coalmen, who were these kind of secret revolutionary societies. They're kind of unfocused, though. Like, what do they want? What are they all trying to, what kind of government are they going to have? They don't really have a plan. Cavour is the opposite, but Cavour has a pretty specific plan, and that plan is to practice realpolitik. Cavour and Bismarck are both practicers and believers in realpolitik. In other words, they're not all that concerned with ideology. They want unification to happen, and they're going to do that kind of by whatever means necessary. Bismarck's famous quote about sausages, it's politics like sausages, it's better not to know how they're made. So Piedmont Sardinia then will begin the Risorgimento, or the resurgence, and really this whole unification process is called the Risorgimento. It's the resurgence of the glory of the Roman Empire, right? So from 1850 on, unification is going to be conservative, nationalistic, and diplomatic, but also pragmatic and practical. After the Crimean War, which is 1853 to 1556, which also, by the way, is when Florence Nightingale will found or really get women involved in nursing in the battlefields. The first kind of step to unification now, or the first like real diplomatic step, besides that seat at the peace table, is Cavour and Napoleon III meeting at Plombières in 1858. Cavour and Napoleon get together and like, okay, we got to get rid of Austria. What are we going to do? So they decide that they're going to provoke Austria into declaring a war, and then they're going to, France will back up Piedmont Sardinia. And so Piedmont is going to line up their troops along the border of Lombardy. And IB kids, you really want to review your map here, because I definitely have some questions about this. Austria will then declare war on Piedmont Sardinia, and Piedmont holds their own against Austria. And France is going to sort of snake Austria at this point and make a separate peace with, Piedmont Sardinia, make a separate peace with Austria and take Nice and Savoy. And then the Piedmontese army, the Piedmont Sardinia army, is actually going to win Lombardy, though, in 1859. So really what you need to know is this timeline. Piedmont Sardinia, they're going to take, in the Austro-Sardinian War of 1859, they're going to add Lombardy. And Garibaldi is going to land in the boot of Italy, right, in Sicily. So here's our boot, and here's our Sicily. He's going to land in Sicily, and he's going to start marching his troops northward. And Cavour probably is peeing his pants at this point, because he's pretty sure that Garibaldi is going to try to take over the whole peninsula. So in 1861, he pretty successfully is going to expel the Bourbon rulers from the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is Naples and Sicily, south of Rome. And the Bourbon rulers, remember, are French, right? The Bourbon royal family. So as he's marching north, Cavour sends his troops south. Cavour and Garibaldi meet outside of Rome, and Garibaldi agrees to support Victor Emmanuel as the king of a united Italy. So to support the idea of Piedmont Sardinia sort of leading the charge. So that will be almost all of Italy at this point. Now, Cavour dies in 1861, so be careful that you don't attribute anything to him post-1861. He basically lives to see unification happen and then croaks. The Austro-Prussian War in 1866 is really about German unification, but when the Austrian troops are diverted to fight the Prussians, Italy will get Venetia, which is up in the north, kind of the thigh of the thigh-high boot. And then again, because of German unification, in 1870, the French troops will leave Rome because they're busy fighting the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War, and Italy now is finally united. There are a couple of areas missing. One would be the Tyrol, which Italy will get in the Treaty of Versailles. Actually, not the Treaty of Versailles, that was just between Allies and German states, but in the Paris peace talks, they'll get the Tyrol after World War I. So that is Italian unification. Now, German unification is a little bit more complicated because there's a lot more German states. The big two, of course, are Prussia and Austria, right? Those are the big two of the great powers, both involved at the Congress of Vienna, both pretty impressive militaries. So before they kind of move towards political unification, they're going to move towards economic unification, and that economic unification is called the Zollverein. So in 1834, it's going to be Prussia and most of the German states. And what this said was that it allows them to trade within those borders of the Zollverein without having to pay taxes. And then the Prussian-Austrian rivalry is going to get kind of more intense, but they will put that aside. It gets intense in 1848, but in 1848, Denmark, which is just north of what would become a united Germany, will basically take Schleswig-Holstein. And Schleswig-Holstein is then going to become kind of a point of contention for German unification. So the Prussians will actually fight with the Austrians in the Danish War of 1864. And this is all kind of Bismarck's mastermind. He's really the guy that you need to know. You just need to know Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm II, or I'm sorry, Kaiser Wilhelm I, who is the Kaiser of Prussia, who will become the Kaiser of United Germany. So Schleswig, if we think of sort of the Danish peninsula coming out of the German states like this, Schleswig is up here, Holstein is here. Austria and Prussia are going to fight together against the Danes in the Danish War of 1864. And then they will decide to each administer one of those regions. So Prussia will be the administrator of Schleswig, Austria will be the administrator of Holstein. 2 years later, Bismarck is going to go into basically provoke another war with Austria, and that's the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. And by this point, they're really realizing that, like, if they're going to lead unification, they need to figure out Austria, and Austria is just too complicated because all these nationalities, like, how can you deal with that? And so they just want Germans. So, and also Bismarck wants it to be Prussian because he's a Junker. He's the Prussian aristocracy. So he's going to fight the Austrians and win what's sometimes also called the 7 Weeks War pretty handily. Now, the Ems dispatch, or the Ems telegram, it's kind of a complicated story, but there was a Hohenzollern candidate for the Spanish throne that the Prussians had supported, and Bismarck is going to edit a telegram that Kaiser Wilhelm I writes to a French diplomat. The diplomat had encouraged him to apologize to Louis Napoleon, who's now called Napoleon III, for supporting the Hohenzollern, because the French are like, no way, we don't want like Germans over here and Prussians over here and Prussians over here, like France in the middle. Like that sounds like a war waiting to happen, which probably was wise. So Bismarck will edit that telegram to make Tanvir, just real quick, Sheila Fitzpatrick is the author of your Russian Revolution reading about the setting. So the Ems dispatch in 1870, he's going to edit that, and then Bismarck will edit it and make it sound as if the Kaiser had insulted Napoleon III. That is published in Paris on July 15th of 1789. Now, when would the French feel most patriotic? Could it be Bastille Day? Yeah. So Bastille Day, July 14th, I might have just said that was published in 1789. It's July 15th, 1870. But it is the day after Bastille Day. And so that's going to be published in Paris. The French are going to be really pissed off, and they're going to declare war against the Prussians. That will lead to the Franco-Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War is going to be pretty quick and pretty severe. If you remember in class, we listened to a story about the Parisian bouquinistes and the guy who had the menu where they were eating even the Parisian zoo animals. And the Prussians then are going to, as kind of the ultimate, insults to the French, they're going to declare the unification of Germany in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles, the most beautiful palace in Europe, the most beautiful room in France. That's where they'll declare their Prussian Empire. Now, just to kind of tie that all back together, in 1864, Prussia will add Schleswig in the Danish War. In 1866, they will add Holstein in the Austro-Prussian War. At that point, most of northern Germany is going to, but they don't think that they can get the south without the French being pretty upset. And Louis Napoleon even says, if Prussia annexes the southern German states, our guns will go off by themselves. Like, he sees this as an act of aggression on the French border. So that's the need for the Franco-Prussian War. And in the Franco-Prussian War, they will add Alsace-Lorraine, which is right there on the French-German border, not the Belgian border. That's going to be a Schlieffen Plan later. But Alsace-Lorraine is going to then become part of a united Germany. Now, in the Treaty of Versailles in 1914, Alsace-Lorraine is the first thing that the French are going to want back. And in 1914, when, now it's Gross Deutschland, right? Well, no, it's not, because there's no Austria. It's Klein Deutschland now, right? It's without Austria, but it is much bigger than it was. So they're going to, in 1914, when the French go to war, Henri Pétain, the French general, is going to use Alsace-Lorraine as a rallying point. Like, we're doing it for Alsace. We're getting revenge for Alsace-Lorraine. So that's pretty much that. Now we have a unified Germany on January 18th, 1871. I don't think this was the smoothest video I've ever done, but hopefully that gives you a good overview. And yes, Gross Deutschland is the bigger of the two. So Gross, big Germany, includes Austria, but they end up finally unifying without Austria. So they end up finally unifying as Klein Deutschland. I said earlier, I agreed with you, Ishan, but what I was thinking was that yes, Germany was now bigger than it had been, but it's not as big as Gross Deutschland. There's never going to be a German state, at least in the 19th century, with Austria. Now, when Hitler starts annexing territories leading up to World War II, he's going to annex Austria, and Hitler's actually Austrian. He's not from a unified Germany, but the Anschluss in 1838 is the German annexation of Austria, which is largely going to be welcomed by the Austrians, not by all. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you saw how the von Trapp family is like fleeing the country because of the German annexation of Austria, but there's not a lot of fight. But that's kind of big picture unification in 1848. There's a lot of talking. Anyway, I'll ask you tomorrow. I just want to kind of know how this went for you, and tell me if you have any tips for how to make it better. How to make it, I think if I could make it more condensed, that would be better. So I will post this on, I'll post the link on Schoology, and I'm going to archive it on YouTube so that you guys can come back and watch whatever you want. The other thing I think I'd like is like a map behind me, so I'm not just like showing you hand figures. But wouldn't that be nice if I had a big map of Europe right there? I could just point to all the regions I'm talking about. So that's that, and hopefully that's helpful to you guys. You want me to summarize the Russian Revolution real quick? Why not? I'm going to give you the quick and dirty version because I have to have a little bit of voice left. Nairima, I think the review guide is on Schoology, somewhere in the updates. But if not, I will send you a message here real quick and send it to you. So Russian Revolution, two revolutions in, I'm not going to go hard on her. There's two revolutions in 1917. The February/March Revolution, remember they used 2 months. Yeah, I know, an hour straight. Tanvir, you got to look at your annotations of Sheila Fitzpatrick to see what she's arguing. Russian Revolution, March, is the provisional government forcing the Tsar to abdicate. It starts with food riots. Again, look, hungry people, hungry workers, they're going to revolt. The Tsar had moved to the front in 1915. And then in March of 1917, the food riots are going to force him finally to abdicate. And then The provisional government, led by Kerensky, will rule throughout most of 1917. He's going to promise to the Allies, I'll stay in the war for you. Like, I'm going to uphold the alliance. I think it's important. And then in, let's see, in the summer of 1917, Kornilov, the general, is going to try to stage a coup d'etat, and he's going to start marching towards Petrograd, which had been renamed, St. Petersburg had been renamed during the war. Make it sound more more Russian and less German. And he's going to start marching towards Petrograd. Kerensky, the head of the provisional government, which remember is just a temporary government, that's what provisional means. They're just trying to write a constitution. He's going to freak out at this point because he thinks it's going to ruin the whole process. So he's going to let the Bolsheviks, who are much more radical and really want to like completely overthrow the state, no parliament, nor Duma, none of that, no constitution. Like, they want a communist system and they want to do it now. He's going to let them all out of jail. He's going to give them guns. And then eventually, oh, my battery's about to die here. Eventually in November of 1917, the Bolsheviks are pretty bloodlessly going to take over the Winter Palace where the provisional government is meeting. They're going to change the guards out with Bolsheviks in disguise. And then they're going to just storm the Winter Palace and get rid of all the members of the provisional government in there. And that is, the Bolsheviks were led by Lenin, but also supported by the Petrograd Soviet. Soviet is just a workers' council that was led by Trotsky. And they're also going to have a ship on the river, the Aurora, but that's not going to end up playing a huge part. But symbolically, apparently, it's become quite famous in Russian history. So that's basically that. And I'll see you guys bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning, okay? See you guys later. Have a good night. Yes, Kornilov is a Menshevik, and he's the head of the provisional government. And no, wait, Kyla, I need to see that comment again. That's not right. Kornilov is a general. He is a military dictator, or he's trying to stage a coup d'etat, probably to become a military dictator. Kerensky is a Menshevik, and he is the head of the provisional government. So Kornilov, I had my class call him one year, is a general. Kerensky is a Menshevik and the head of the provisional government. Trotsky is a Bolshevik who is the head of the Petrograd Soviet. And Lenin is a Bolshevik who's the head of the Communist Party, I guess. I'm not sure who you're asking are on the same team, Kyla. I think it's Trotsky and Lenin are on the same team. Lenin's not really on Kerensky's team, I wouldn't say. He wants to move things along faster. He doesn't want he says he's going for the revolution after next. He thinks the vanguard, the head of the revolution, need to kind of lead people to it. I'm going to stop this video now, and I will try to answer questions that you have in the comments, because I'm afraid my iPad is going to die, and I'll try to just type them on my tablet here. So bye guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good night.